Okay, now we're looking at part 2 of social psychology. And what we're going to start here with is looking at attitude and attitude change. Now, what an attitude is, it's a relatively stable evaluation of a person or an object or a situation or an issue along a continuum ranging from positive and negative. Now, there's 3 components to an attitude. There's cognitive, emotional, and behavioral. Now, when we look at the sort of what is cognitive, well, this is the thoughts and beliefs about an attitudinal object. So it's just what goes on in our head about it. The emotional part is the feelings towards that attitudinal object, and then the behavioral would be the predispositional concerning actions towards that object. So if you have an attitude about a person, a thing, or an activity, it's how you think and act about it, how you feel about it, and what you would do normally under those circumstances. And they're acquired by first-hand experience or by observing. So you observe people, objects, situations, and issues, maybe mass media, and it's strengthened by associating with others who share them. So attitudes are something that we have, we learn them, and we develop them through the association with other people. And so here you're seeing this relationship between the 3 components of attitude. Now, a term that's coined in social psychology is what's called cognitive dissonance. Now, cognitive dissonance is the unpleasant state that occurs when people become aware of inconsistencies between their attitudes or between their attitudes and their behavior. So if I carry 2 separate beliefs or attitudes, or my attitude about something and my behavior about that same thing are different, that's what's cognitive dissonance. It results from a desire to maintain self-esteem and reduce discomfort. People try to reduce their cognitive dissonance by either changing their behaviors or changing their attitudes and bringing them together and aligning them, and explaining away the inconsistency or minimizing its importance. Now, we've touched on compliance, but persuasion is different. Persuasion is a deliberate attempt to influence the attitudes or the behaviors of another person. And there's 4 elements to this. Now, you can either influence through persuasion by considering the source of the communication. So influence is increased when there's credibility, expertise, and trustworthiness, even attractiveness and likability as the source, so the spokesperson, if you will. If they're credible or perceived to be credible, they're expert or perceived to be expert, trustworthy or perceived to be trustworthy, attractive or likable, then that helps in the persuasion. Now, another element that contributes to persuasion is that of the audience. Now, as odd as this might sound, the lower the IQ of the audience, the easier they are to persuade. Now, that's not surprising, except we are often the audience. And if we find ourselves being persuaded, we have to ask ourselves, how simply have I accepted something and how little critical thinking did I apply to it? The third point is that of being the message, the what is being said part. And so what's being said can influence the persuasion. If it's strong, positive, and aligned with attitudes I already have, I might be more easily persuaded by the message. And then the medium is the fourth. This is the means by which the message is transmitted. Is it transmitted by a person that I can identify with? Is it transmitted by an ad? Is it transmitted by an image? Is it transmitted by a friend? You know, the medium of how the message is transmitted can influence my persuasion. And so let's look at 2 of those elements right here. The source. One-sided message is more persuasive if an audience is not informed. So if I'm going to be persuasive to an uninformed audience, then just say the one side of the argument or one side of the message, and it'll be much more persuasive. 2-sided messages are best when the audience is best informed, fairly intelligent, and initially opposed to the point of view. Then I'll show both sides of an argument. The appeals based on fear, if you do this, you're going to die, are most effective when definitive actions are outlined so the audience can avoid the fear item. Smoking cigarettes will kill you is easier when we tell people how to quit smoking or how not to smoke. You'll get more people convinced or be persuaded along those lines. Nutritional messages are more effective when benefits are outlined. Two-sided appeals will have more sway than one-sided appeals. And repetition, the more often something is presented, the more it will be believed. And you'll see this in a lot of ads. The more that they can be in your face and be visible, the more likely we will be convinced. People scrutinize contrary arguments carefully and exert more effort to refute them. People will judge such arguments as being weaker than those that they support. And messages are less persuasive if vivid elements are included. The more the colorful language and striking examples, people are more easily convinced. And a lot of times, persuasion isn't about facts. Persuasion's about how you dress up the argument. This is why critical thinking is so important, to discern the strength of an argument from the weakness of an argument. Now, within social psychology, there's also this better understanding of prejudice and discrimination. Now, the two is clearly related, but they're different. Prejudice are the attitudes, usually they're negative, towards others based on their gender, religion, race, or membership to a particular group. It involves beliefs and emotions. Now, prejudices themselves aren't necessarily visible. The prejudice is beliefs or attitudes we hold within ourselves. Discrimination, though, is the behavior, usually negative, directed towards others based on their gender, religion, race, or membership to a particular group. So, prejudice is the thinking, discrimination is the action. So we've had all sorts of examples of people who have experienced prejudice and discrimination from racial groups. It's known as racism. The handicapped, women, which is known as sexism, religious groups, the elderly, and for that matter the young, which is known as ageism, and homosexuality. All sorts of examples where people will hold an attitude about any one of those groups and may, in some cases, express behaviors towards any of those groups. Now, when we look at, well, where does prejudice and discrimination come from, there's some theories about that. One is called the realistic conflict theory. The view that as competition increases among social groups for scarce resources, so do prejudice and discrimination and hatred. We see this in a number of different cultures where this exists. Now, in order for that to occur, we need to have what's called, or we need to view people in either the in-group or the out-group. The in-group would be the social group that has a strong sense of togetherness and from which others are excluded. So we see this in friendly ways when we have our hockey team go against their hockey team. Ours is the in-group, they are the out-group. But when it gets applied to more racial groups, religious groups, sexual orientation, men and women, then that becomes more problematic when we start seeing that promote prejudice and discrimination. Whereas the out-group is the social group made up of individuals specifically identified by the in-group as not belonging. This could lead to an us and them thinking, increasing competition, hostility, prejudice, discrimination, and in extreme cases, war. Now, another theory is that of social cognitive theory. And here the mental process that people use to notice and interpret and remember information about the social world. So processes used to simplify, categorize, and order the social world are the same processes that distort our view. So social cognitive theory looks at the way we already do what we do in terms of organizing the world around us and the social world. Who's more likely me? Who's different from me? Who is us and who is them? And then applies the stereotype or this potential for stereotyping, where it's a widely shared belief about characteristics, traits, and attitudes and behaviors of members of a social group. So painting everybody with the same brush. Racial, ethnic, or religious includes the assumption that the members of such group are usually alike. And the thing that you have to consider is, if you group all Caucasian people, if you're a member of that group, and say, well, they're all the same, well, you know, as well as I do, that everybody's individual. Well, why wouldn't we apply that to any other religious, ethnic, or social group? They are as individual as anybody else is, and yet with stereotypes we tend to generalize and paint everybody to be the same. People attend to information that confirms a stereotype. More diversity is perceived to the in-group and more similarity among people, among all out-group members. This can be based on gender, age, or other characteristics. They all look the same would be something that would fit within that. Age stereotypes can be more pronounced than gender. We see a variety of different examples of where stereotype can be applied. Now, one of the other areas, you can look at prejudice and compliance and obedience as kind of like these negative things in some respects, but they also in social psychology want to explore pro-social behavior. And pro-social behaviors are behaviors that benefit others, such as helping, cooperation, sympathy. Young children usually respond sympathetically to companions in distress before their second birthday. They seem to have something like that really early. So reasons for helping, well, there are many reasons, but we're only going to touch on a couple here. Altruism. This is the behavior that is aimed at helping other people, requires some sacrifice, and is not performed for any personal gain. It's where you go out of your way to do something for somebody because it's what you want to do and what you think is right to do. Whether you gain any recognition or any reward for that is inconsequential. Empathy is the ability to take the perspective of another person, to sort of suspend your certainty about what you think about them and put yourself in the back burner and try to view the things from their perspective. It's not sympathy for somebody, that's sympathy. Empathy is to get a view from another person's point of view. Commitment, this is where we're more likely to behave altruistically when commitment is high. We're more likely to donate a kidney to a family member than to a stranger. Our commitment to our family is higher, and so we're more apt to do that. Our commitment is there. The social responsibility norm varies by culture. That is to say, not all cultures have the same level of social responsibility. In the U.S., more likely to help anyone in life-threatening situation, but only family members in moderate, dangerous situations, where in other cultures, they're more open to help anybody in need. Now, one of the things that's kind of a curiosity in social psychology, and one of the studies that they've done, is what's called the bystander effect. As the number of bystanders at an emergency increases, the probability that the victim will receive help from them decreases. And the help, if given, is likely to be delayed. So the more people who are witnessing an attack, the less likely the victim will get support. It seems peculiar, but it's been observed many times, and the research on it is wondering how come. And one of the explanations is what's called diffusion of responsibility. Feeling among bystanders at an emergency is that the responsibility for helping is shared by the group. Someone else must be doing something, so I won't bother duplicating that service. Makes each person feel less compelled to act if he or she is alone. She alone was to bear the responsibility. I must help. No one else can. If I had that attitude, I would act differently. When others seem common to conclude nothing is wrong and no intervention is necessary. Now, social psychologists have also tackled another issue or other issues, and one of them is that of aggression. And the definition is the intentional infliction of physical or psychological pain or harm on others. And it takes many forms, and it takes place in many situations. It can be at home, work, on the road, spectator sports. It's all over the place. And when we look at what reasons there might be, biological factors in aggression, Freud and Konrad Lorenz had some theories. Freud's instinct theory turned inward as self-destruction, turned outward as aggression or violence towards others, and he called that his instinct theory. Whereas Konrad Lorenz said inborn fighting instinct in many animal species, most social psychologists, aggression is more complex than both Freud and Konrad Lorenz suggested. Some of the genetic material says that meta-analysis twin studies estimate heritability of about half or 50% for aggression. The link for criminal behavior was also established. Adoptees with criminal biological parents are 4 times more likely to commit criminal crimes. Adoptees with both criminal biological and adoptive parents were 14 times more likely to commit crimes. So genes may increase sensitivity to models of aggression. They're not exactly sure how. One might be that low arousal to automatic nervous system is linked to antisocial and violent behavior. So seeking stimulation, excitement, and exhibiting fearlessness in the face of danger. So other possible causes for aggression, well, heredity. If one identical twin is aggressive, there's a 50% chance that the other twin will be aggressive as well. Adopted children's aggressive tendencies are more like those of their biological parents than that of their adopted parents. So with adopted children, it's their biology and their biological parents that have more influence on their aggressive behavior than their adopted parents, which suggests a heredity basis. Now, low arousal, this is people who are not easily aroused, so they don't get excited very easy, so they have low arousal. So when things get you really anxious, they're not, they're still calm. People with low levels of arousal seek stimulation and excitement to increase the arousal, so they need more, and sometimes aggression can be that more. High levels of testosterone have been correlated, testosterone with some forms of aggression, such as intimate partner violence in both men and women. The neurological factors where brain tumors and other neurological diseases have been linked to aggressive behavior, and as many of us probably already know, alcohol abuse. For some people who are intoxicated, committing the majority of murders and most other violent crimes. Other influences, frustration-aggression hypothesis. This is where frustration produces aggression, likely if it's intense, seems unjustified, and arouses negative emotions. Pain, loud noises, bad odors, and extreme heat are linked to aggression. So when the frustration level increases, pain, loud noises, bad odors, extreme heat, so does the aggression. And then also looking at scapegoating. Scapegoating is displaced aggression onto members of a minority group or other innocent targets not responsible for the frustrating situation. Children angry at parents may take it out on younger siblings as an example of scapegoating. And then lastly is the social learning theory of aggression, that people learn to behave aggressively by observing aggressive models and by having an aggressive response reinforced. Higher rates among groups and cultures that condone aggression. Bandura, who's a researcher, believed that role models, the family, media, elevate aggression. 1/3 of people abused go on to become abusers. 1/3 do not. 1/3 may if the stress levels are high enough. Majority of abused and neglected children do not become abusive. Some become withdrawn, isolated, and passive. Media violence enhances children and adolescents' aggression in interactions with strangers, classmates, and friends, and may stimulate psychological arousal, lower inhibitions, and cause unpleasant feelings and decrease sensitivity to violence, making it more acceptable. Aggression and video game link may be due to the preference towards entertainment rather than to the entertainment that features violence. So that's the first part of social psychology as we look at it in here in Psychology 2. I hope that's been helpful, and we'll do the second video and post that as well as some of the additional videos that you can enjoy and sort of pick up some information for yourself. Good luck.